So I think, that switch, going back to school in the fall, I remember just feeling uh, that dread in late August. And it usually gets really intense when you feel that chill, at night. Uh, uh, I used to go to Rosebud Fair, and then at night that chill starts coming on, and I would just wouldn't know
You
what to
mean
do.
the fall chill kind of thing? Where did you go to school at as a
Saint
kid?
St. Francis.
St. Francis. Were you in residency there, or did you were?
Yeah, yeah.
And how long so how long were you there? Like, did you get to go home at all, or did you?
You go home a couple of weeks in December, and then the next time you went home was when school was out. So,
Okay.
Uh,
Not much. Did you stay on the weekends then too, or? Oh yeah. Wow.
Some kids went home on weekends if they lived close by, but my parents weren't close by.
Right.
So I would probably be there 4 months at a time without going home.
Wow.
The early years, later years, another family used to take me home some weekends, maybe once a month. So I was able to leave. But when I think I went there when I was 8 the first time. When you're 8 and you don't go home.
Yeah. What do you think about the fact that wealthy people in Europe and back east, or in other places now, send their kids to boarding schools like that? I think there's an obvious difference, but I wonder. I've always wondered how you would think of that. How is that different in your mind?
Well, I think for the kids, it probably wasn't different. Maybe the only difference is being that there was a choice. For the kids, probably not. But I think the treatment of the kids, the discipline, the parenting, and so forth, probably wasn't the same. It was, in hindsight, when I think about it, it seems like everything was, you were treated like a lesser being, like you were stupid or something. And I don't think you'd have that in another boarding school.
That's a really good point, because the obvious one I've always said is that that was a family tradition, that there was an expectation, and that they had gone through it, so their children would go through it. But I think and then obviously the attitude is different, but they would have had to have had surrogate mothers and nurses and all of this very supportive.
Yeah.
Plus, you would have treated them extremely well because they come from affluent families.
And they're paying.
Yeah. That's a lot different. That's a very good point.
Yeah.
That's a lot different than. But either way, I always kind of mention that with students because it is so foreign to how I was brought up. Because I went to school, public school, and I was with my family, and my 4 sisters and my brother. I was always around them, and so I just think of that as being very cruel, almost to a kid. So it's hard for me to even relate to that. But to think of a little 8-year-old kid getting in a bus or on a train to go a long distance to stay with all these other kids, and not being permitted to behave the way they would normally behave, and being punished if they,
Well, there's a huge difference, I think, in culture, cultural practices. You're so used to not complete freedom. We had a lot more freedom. Parenting was different. And then to go into something that I always think of almost like military, regimentation, to go into that, I think, was a huge adjustment.
right,
I just had a hard time with that.
right,
I generally, I wasn't rebellious. I was to some extent, but I would withdraw, just totally shut down. I would function physically, but I was just like going through the motions, and
Right.
I was somewhere else.
right. Well, and if you were from a wealthy Eastern family that would send their kids to boarding schools, you probably were used to a regiment with a nanny and not having much contact with your parents anyways back in your home.
Yeah.
So school would be just an extension of that. It wouldn't be as such a dramatic change for them. If you were brought up with a very strict discipline to begin with, that's interesting. And so what we were going to do is start off with some pictures. For example, what would are you familiar with that bird? And then what kind of bird do you think it is?
I don't know if it's the Wombliglishka, or just this effect. Those different
The little fingers on the
splotches of
right,
color.
right.
Might be the spotted, or no, it's an eagle. Looks like an eagle.
Yeah,
Looks
and
like
so
a hawk.
if you saw that out in the wild, what would you call it in English?
An eagle.
An eagle, okay. And in Lakota, what would you refer to it as?
Wombly.
If you saw that, what would you refer to it as in English?
An eagle.
An eagle, particularly it's a bald eagle.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then would you use the same term in Lakota, which again was wobbly?
Wombly.
Yeah. Now, if you saw this bird, what would you call that in English?
A hawk.
Okay. And then in Lakota, what would you refer to it as?
Chetan.
Okay. I'd like, since I was a kid, I've always liked this particular bird, and this is actually a falcon. It's called a peregrine falcon.
Oh.
And one of the things about it is that it's got a very sharp line. And this actually
That's what it looks like. Yeah.
whereas a hawk, and I think this is a red-tailed hawk,
Okay.
has fingers
Okay.
on
Okay.
it. And then an eagle is similar, but its fingers are usually a little smaller. And of course, this is a bald eagle, so it's got a white.
This looks big. Just from the photo.
Right.
But it's not. I thought a red-tailed hawk was lighter. What do I know?
Well,
okay, fingers.
Yeah, and I learned that as a kid, that the hawk and the falcon are distinctively different that way. What we're interested in is, part of it is looking at language to see what kinds of terms various tribes would use to describe birds of prey.
Okay.
So as I say that, are there other words that come to mind one of the words, one of the common phrases I've always heard in this area is spotted eagle.
Well, that's what I was trying to refer to. See that kind of the color? I thought maybe that was a spotted eagle.
Sure.
The wings, the different colors on the wings. But, you know, it's...
One of the things is that we find is that there's like a golden eagle,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's a red-tailed hawk, and but spotted eagle it's not as clear
Mm-hmm.
if they're referring to a hawk or if they're really referring to a kind of eagle.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever thought about that? Because it's just used so commonly, spotted eagle.
Mm-hmm.
But I think biologists would probably call it a hawk.
Hmm.
Do you recall anyone ever talking about that? Or
Mm-mm.
how about the term spotted eagle from a cultural context? You know, like Thunderbird is more mythological in
Mm-hmm.
some tribal communities.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any terms like that come to mind when you think of birds? Or any adjectives that are used with birds that might give a spiritual or holy kind of context to them?
Okay. Wakia.
Is that ever used with birds? From what you're familiar
Mm-hmm.
with? Yeah. Okay. Is there any stories does that bring to mind any stories about birds that you can recall? Or
Well, I use the term wakela, you know, for my email
okay.
address, which refers to like either the dove, pigeon, and how they came to be called that, I don't know that, because wakia to us is like the thunder beings, you know, that we say wakia hoton, which is thunder, wakia duampi, which is lightning, and we use that same term for the dove or the pigeon, which is wakianla, the diminutive la, you know, a smaller thunder being,
Okay.
you know.
Is that sacred term then associated with other animals too, like horse or buffalo or any of those? Do those have a sacred connotation to them?
They do, but not with the language, what we
Okay.
call them.
Okay.
But we perceive them as, you know, a special being.
Okay. Are there any stories, and it's always hard when someone puts you on the spot and say, wow, are there any stories about birds that come to mind? And it doesn't have to be a predatory bird, just any kind of bird. You know, any kind of story for a child or some kind of instructive thing. When you mentioned the dove, the diminutive sacred,
Mm-hmm.
what does that mean to you, or how do you interpret that?
I think I've always gotten the impression that doves or pigeons were kind of like intermediaries between the thunder beings and the human. Wakianla, you know, that you don't kill them.
Okay.
That's what I was always told.
Okay.
Yeah, you leave them alone.
And and that goes kind of to a cultural use. Do you think that was a common practice to trying to avoid killing doves or particular animals for their significance that way? Does that?
Well, I think that like doves and pigeons, you don't kill them, and to eat them is unthinkable.
Okay.
And I think the dog too has some kind of a spiritual significance in that you don't just eat them for common, you know, purpose, like a chicken. You know, you can eat a chicken for dinner, and it's just acceptable. But for a dog, you know, we used them ceremonially, you know, ceremony purposes. And we recall, I know many times I've heard the story behind the relationship between the dog and the human.
Okay.
That at one time, you know, there was a lot of times, you know, when we think of a human plight, we generally think of it as a time to change human behavior. You know, we're not doing so good. You know, we're suffering sickness or famine, so we better rethink about the way we're living. Kind of a time of reflection. And there's a story about a famine that the people were suffering, and the dog came to them. And many of our stories, you know, animals and humans can converse, you know, they talk to each other. So the dog comes to the human and says, you know, I need you, you know, you're starving, and I can help you, you know. Uchijab Ktawahiha, come to help you. And the dog tells the human being that I came to be food for you, and you can survive this time of starvation, but you also have to agree that you'll take care of me too. And so the people ate the dog and survived the famine. And thereafter, the humans take care of the dog. It's not wild out there anymore, that it comes to live with the human beings.
Sure.
And there's kind of a bond there, you know, a loyalty. The dog to the man, and the man to the dog. And so I think, you know, that story always helps me to understand the relationship between, you know, the dog and humans.
Right.
You know, you can kick a dog, but he'll still follow you around.
Right.
And so it makes sense to me.
I heard a story once, and I think it was a Lakota story, about a blood clot in a buffalo. Mm-hmm. And the blood clot was calling out to the buffalo, and the buffalo said, I will give you clothing, I will give you mm-hmm. food, and gives mm-hmm. himself to the blood clot, and the blood clot represented the people. Mm-hmm. And so there was a relationship that mm-hmm. was born out of that mm-hmm. sacrifice on the part of the buffalo mm-hmm. that speaks to the way they're supposed to interact. Mm-hmm. You're supposed to, you know, mm-hmm. the communal nature of the buffalo, you learn from that behavior. Mm-hmm. You know? Mm-hmm. Another question that the biologist we've been talking, and is the use of feathers and plumage in regalia. Mm-hmm. If a child asks you that doesn't know anything about it, so why are they wearing feathers? Why do the Indians wear feathers? How, as if you were explaining to a child, what would you say?
Well, we certainly aren't trying to fly. But, you know, I think what's really interesting, and I've learned this again from my grandfather and my mother, that Lakota people have a belief that we need to adopt the characteristics of other beings, you know, because we're so frail. An example is that, you know, I noticed that the dragonfly was something, I didn't find it on women's gear. I've kind of studied some artifacts in different museums, and the dragonfly I didn't see that often, but where I did see it was in menswear. You know, there's dragonflies on the trailing war bonnet, you know. It was on the strip of leather that holds the feathers. And then I saw it on men's leggings. I never saw it on women's wear. And so I asked different people about it, why the Tuswecha was on, you know, what the significance of that was. And, you know, some responses I got were that, you know, the Tuswecha is very swift and very agile. And that is what the characteristic they desired for the warriors. And so that's why they beaded Tuswecha on the men's wear, things that they may wear to battle.
Sure.
And I think that different, even names that were given to, you know, to people, they would name them after some animal whose characteristics, you know, either the human mimicked those characteristics or they desired those characteristics. One concept I heard was that Lakota were tatanka iachi. Iachi is to want, to be like. And they say that Lakota were tatanka iachi, you know, because of that story about the common origin of the buffalo and the people. You know, the buffalo, or the blood clot in the buffalo.
Right.
I heard the same story about the beings emerging from one cave, and they survived on the surface, and they came back for the rest of the beings, and it was the buffalo and what eventually evolved to be humans. But buffalo called to them and say, "Come to the surface. I've been here and I survived." And the other beings said, you know, "What are we going to eat? And it's cold up there." And the buffalo said, "I will feed and clothe you." And so they emerged and they followed the buffalo, mimicking, you know, I mean, they watched the buffalo and saw how they existed. And so, you know, the belief emerged from their tatanka iachi. We want to be, we desire to be, we're watching them, we're mimicking them. And so that's why they say we're Pteoyate.
Sure.
You know, we're Buffalo Nation.
I read a Rikara creation story, and in the Rikara story there are three, Mother Corn is on the earth with these animals. And there's a gopher, a badger, a long-nosed mouse, and a mole. And then each of them, she asks them to help get the people out who are stuck in the earth. So they each take a turn, but they each get marked. The badger gets face burned, and the gopher gets streaks across the eyes, and the long-nosed mouse squeezes the door open and gets his nose squeezed. And at the end of the story, it says, "And they came out and saw the other pathways where other people had been helped with the aid of the buffalo." It says that right at the end of this written description.
Wow.
Isn't that interesting?
Wow.
What's your reaction to that? I always thought that was, it kind of, well, what's your reaction to it?
Well, I think my reaction is that Rick must be very perceptive to be sensitive to the stories of other cultures or other peoples. You know, I mean, I've heard of people in the South that had interaction or knew about, you know. I heard a story about Canyon de Chelly, where people were in famine, and the buffalo came down there to save them. You know, they came and said, we're food, and like we are up north. And this is the Navajo Dene telling these stories.
Right.
Like we knew you ate buffalo up there. You know, so there's sometimes stories traveling distances and generations are amazing.
Well, and I think also that there's this non-exclusivity. You know, there's an acceptance for other power and other other descriptions out there. There's a Mohawk creation story that talks about forming people out of clay, but it accounts for Africans, dark-skinned people.
Wow.
That they were, you know, lighter skinned weren't baked long enough, or whatever their metaphor is, which, you know, I think mainstream society was, oh, they're just changing the story to account for differences, but you know, like the story of Babel talks about how people have different languages and stuff, that there is a acceptance within the story that is unusual to Western tradition, you know, Judeo-Christian, because it's very kind of exclusive. Well, this is kind of how it happened, you know. So, but that's interesting, because the blood clot story, I think, makes more sense to me now in terms of an emergent story. You know, that in using, you were talking about the dragonfly. What's that term again that you used?
Tuswecha.
And how would you spell that in English?
Tusweca.
Okay. And the term you used a different term. Was it Chican?
Chetan.
And how do you spell that?
Cetan.
T-A-N. Okay. Talk about, you know, some folks will use turkey feathers, and instead of why would they do that? Explain that. If you.
They would use turkey feathers instead of.
Well, they would dye them, like they would make them look like. Is it just cheaper, or is there any issue of being respectful to eagle feathers, or?
Well, I think there was a period of time that there was a lot more respect for eagle feathers, and now we're losing that, you know, respect. You go to a powwow and you can see it, you know.
Right.
And I think the eagle feathers probably came about because of not only are they protected, you know, the red-tailed hawk is protected, and so the scarcity too would be an issue, you know, contributing to the use of turkey feathers.
And I liked how you described the need or the wish to kind of emulate the power or the skill that something has, like the dragonfly. When you think of the spotted eagle, I mean, what characteristics are associated with that particular being?
My understanding, and I've not seen this or witnessed it, but it's a belief that you pick up, particularly in ceremony, the spotted eagle flies high, you know, and therefore reaches, you know, places that we don't know about. that's what I was always told in ceremony. You know, I come with messages, you know, from elsewhere. That's the spirit of the spotted eagle is considered to be very powerful for its medicinal qualities, you know, spiritual healing, and like I said, it's a messenger. You know, it brings messages. Almost like kind of a combination of psychology and you know, somebody who helps in spiritual ways. But it brings, you know, really good advice from elsewhere. You know, it goes places that other beings don't go.
Okay. And let's continue as we think about different animals. What strikes you or your impression? I know owls always seem to. What is their character? What are they about?
Well, I think they. I was always told that if you hear the owl hooting twice, you know, owls usually normally may hoot 3 times, but twice is when you really have to be alert and careful. That you know, the belief that there is fate just around the corner, you know, it's there, but you can sometimes avoid it, you know, you don't invite it, so you have to be on very good behavior.
Okay.
That it may be the harbinger of death in the family or something, you know.
How about, I can't think of any right now, but isn't like a magpie, aren't there stories about them that kind of, I don't know, being foolish or something, or I was trying to...
Troublesome
Is that
to humans. As a child, my role was to keep the magpies from stealing our food. They're thieves. You know, they would either take the corn we had drying on the roof of the house, or the meat, the drying meat. You know, they didn't do for themselves. They were always trying to scavenge off of humans. And in that way, I think they were dependent in a sense, but full of tricks. You know, I would sit on the roof with a big long stick and wave them, keep them away from the food, you know. But in another sense, they were always around the human communities. You know, they seemed to always be hanging out with human beings.
Right.
And foolish, yeah.
You know, with the Iktomi, with the trickster, he can transform himself, right? And turns into, there's a purpose for whatever he transforms into, isn't there? Why the spider? Why is that associated with him?
I've often wondered about that, why people chose the Iktomi, or to call it Iktomi, because you know, the appearance of Iktomi is always left to the imagination. I was never told what it is. It could be anything, anybody. So it teaches you to be cautious about not just one thing, one being, but also Iktomi could be the person next to you, you know. And so, you know, Iktomi, I'm just curious, he's maybe the web trapping things or people.
Multiple legs, maybe that might. does the term itself mean spider? Does
Mhm.
Iktomi?
Mhm.
And that's, how do you spell that?
Iktomi.
And is that identical to if you saw a spider, would you refer to it as Iktomi then?
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm. But it seems like when I heard the stories, I was told the Iktomi stories, in my mind I never saw a spider. You know, it was nameless, faceless, shapeless. It could be this or that, you know, it could be small. Iktomi's known for turning into a tiny being and jumping in holes to escape people. You know, so it was left to your imagination.
So shapeshifter.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I think in hindsight, it seems like the magpie was always very close to Iktomi, you know.
I was at a deal in Chicago at the Newberry, and the conversation started talking about bears, and bears had a real interesting. They thought of them far different than a lot of animals. Do you know of any bear stories, or what the character of the bear is supposed to be like?
Well, I think the bear, I remembered, you know, the comments about bears was always that, you know, probably their hibernation stage, that was kind of a special skill, you know, nearly dead, I think is what I heard, you know, IEHL, you know, they can go into that state. But also that in ceremony, when the bear comes, the bear spirit, that it was a very good prognosis if you were ill, because the bear has very powerful medicine. You know, they say the bear came, so you're going to be okay. You know.
So yeah, I suppose you could, the bear almost dies and comes back to life again.
Mm-hmm.
That's very recuperative.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where I'm from in western Montana, there's more bear stories, and especially when you get up the Pacific Northwest and into the Arctic, they talk about the bear knowing human language real well. So you always had to be careful about when you were talking about hunting a bear. And then if you gut a bear, it's got the same, it looks like a human being.
Yeah, anatomy.
Yeah. And their guy from the Southwest said that he got scolded, or they would scold children if they did things like shake trees. They said, you're not supposed to act like a bear. So a bear will push on a tree. And so bears have always been kind of interesting to me, because they seem different, you know, in their power.
Well, nearly human too. You know, my grandpa used to always say that Mathoke uchashas emani, the matho walks like a man. You know, if you look at it when it's walking, it's like, wow.
Yeah.
The mannerisms of, I mean, even now, I can go to a ceremony and they'll appeal to the bear. And I went to a ceremony, and the friend I went with was having a lot of trouble with a knee, and I didn't see they gave her a jar of bear grease, a very small jar. They told her to put it on there all the time, and you know, put some heat on it. And I thought, where'd you get the bear grease? I hated to ask, you know.
Right.
It was there, you know, after the ceremony was over, and so. But bear grease they use a lot for, you know, for a lot of things.
Right. Any other animals that come to mind? Anything about the character of deer or elk that seemed to? Because elk is a pretty common translated name.
Mm-hmm.
Charging elk.
Mm-hmm. White elk,
white
spotted elk.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I did a list of bear names, and I came up with probably close to 40. Just in the local region.
Oh.
Yeah, and elk is up there pretty close. The elk is known for its how do you say that? Courtship skills. It's
okay.
It's kind of a they say if a guy's real attracts women, he's got elk medicine.
So virile and
Mm-hmm.
maybe a fertility reference or
Yeah.
something there.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the turtle for women, that's made a big comeback. It's like the suetra is, a male kind of quality, or the males want dragonfly qualities, but for women it's the turtle. For its endurance.
Oh, yeah.
It's not fast, it's deliberate, maybe slow, but it's like the hare and the tortoise story. The same qualities of it'll get there, it's durable. And so that symbol is coming back very strong. I get a lot of requests to make the chikpa, where you put the belly button.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. Amulets for the chikpa. Yeah.
And with that, what's the significance of holding it that way to keep the belly button?
Well, again, there you wish the turtle qualities for the woman.
Okay.
And you put the belly button in there, and it would protect it. The spirit of the turtle would protect your child.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, yeah.
Very good. So your mother is always with you in a way, or something. There's a kind of symbolism or something there. But that persistence, that's
Yeah.
certainly a mother.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to take off to get my son, but I had a couple questions at the end. Do you know of folks that might be interested in talking about birds that we could talk to that may, kind of like Lakota ecologists or something that come to mind? I was going to talk to Albert Whitehead.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other people that you would think might be interested?
Wilmer Mastiff.
Okay, Wilmer, you bet.
Yeah, I think he's got an incredible repertoire of songs and stories. I was just going to mention real quickly that when the turtle amulet is making its comeback, people were starting to use it for boys too, which is not bad. I mean, it's an evolution of a practice, but I always tell them, can you make me a turtle? And I'd say, I'd rather make you a lizard for your boy.
Ah, okay.
The lizard is the male amulet.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So I see you want the young girl to emulate
Yeah,
the turtle.
the turtle.
And then with the lizard, what is there a characteristic there being identified, or is that just male?
I think it's has to do with the lizard's connection with the earth. The story I heard was they used to take a lizard or find a lizard and watch it when the men were going to hunt buffalo. They wanted to find the buffalo. They would watch a lizard and they would watch it until it would turn some way. You know, it would sense something in that direction.
Right.
And so they would go in that direction. So it was able to sense the movement of the buffalo. It was a good hunter.
Very good.
And I don't know if it smelled it or it felt the vibration, but the hunters would go in whatever direction the lizard indicated.
Sure.
So that's a story I heard about that.
Sure. There's a intuitiveness
Mm-hmm.
that's
Mhm.
associated, which you want to have. If you're a hunter or a guy, you want to have that.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
How about any other animal? Any other animals come to mind that I know it's kind of difficult when you're kind of put on the spot. I know you hear hundreds of stories and songs and stuff, but stories about the horse, for example, does that?
Well, I've heard a story recently, I would say about 5 years ago, from the Manderson area, that the Lakota were afraid of this creature that lived in the water, because when they were getting water, sometimes it would come out and chase them. And it was scaly, and it moved on. It was like a turtle without the shell. You know, it was scaly, and it would chase them. And eventually, if you can imagine how many centuries this would be, you know, it evolved so it walked on land, stayed on land. And as it did, it grew hair, and its legs got longer. But they lived pretty far north. They moved north when they emerged out of the water and grew legs and hair. And there was a young man that who he heard stories about this, and so he went far. He went north, traveled pretty far, until he found him, and he talked to this being up there. You know, who are you? And they asked him, and he said, I came from the south, Itokahata, Wa'u. And eventually he got to communicating with them, and one day there was a wildfire that was raging and coming pretty fast with the wind. And this being came to him and said, you know, the fire is coming, you're too slow, I can carry you. And so he jumped on its back, and they raced, you know, away from the wildfire. And after that, you know, out of gratitude, you know, the man stayed real close to the horse. And one day he said, "Oh, come with me, you know, back to my people. I'm not the only one." And so the horse talked with the other horses, and some of them went with him, and they went back, met the other Lakota people, and then they had a relationship with them. They carried them, you know, when they went hunting, and they carried them, you know, when they had to protect their territory, as in warfare. But one day the horse gathered with the other horses, and they went to talk to the Lakota people, and they told them that they were leaving. And the men said, "Why are you leaving us?" And they said, "Since we came and since we helped you, we've caused some harm to you, that you are aggressive, wa'achnia, you know, you've developed this aggressiveness that is not good for you, And so we caused that. And so we're going to leave. So you can go back to the way things were before we came. And they left. And a while later, some more of them came from the south. But they were a lot more careful about the relationship and, you know, how they were.
That's a good story. I like that.
Isn't it interesting?
It is an interesting story.
Withdrawing?
Yeah. Isn't there a term for dinosaur in Lakota? Isn't there? Yeah. That's also interesting how they account for that, too.
Well, what's really interesting, this amphibious creature was called Wamanitu. They had a name for it.
Huh.
Imagine how far back that
Right.
was. Like with the dinosaur, we call them Unkchechila. Their poop is brown. And it's organic. So how would they know?
Right.
Or how would they know what to call it?
Yeah.
That must have gone a long way.
Right.
The term. I was going to mention real quickly that I think the shield, the grouse, you know, their dancing may have influenced the regalia too.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've heard that about prairie chickens too.
That's shield.
Okay.
Yeah.